The first step is to probably set up an architectural committee or something like that, where what you do then is you get your juniors to come and present what they've done, and how they want to structure a particular technology solution.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast presented by Cornerstone International Alliance. I am your host, Nick Olson. On this show, I get the opportunity to talk with the brightest minds in lower middle market M&A. Together, we discuss industry intelligence, deal management, shared successes, specialized expertise, and much more. If you serve the small to medium-sized business owner, this show will offer you tactics and insights you can use and implement now to become a master in M&A. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast. Today's guest is Chris Burke, an operator who spent 25 years in the trenches building and scaling real businesses. He co-founded Brickenden, working with global banks like JP Morgan and Citi, and built Hybrid Hero, now used by brands like BMW, Dyson, and Pepsi. Today, he leads Aduvo, helping 5 million to 50 million founder-led businesses break through growth ceilings and helping them scale. Chris has strong real-world views on why businesses stall, why most acquisitions fail to create value, and why structure, not revenue, drives outcomes. Chris, welcome to the show. Excited to have you and looking forward to our conversation here today. How you doing?
Good, Nick. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about your current business, Aduvo, and just your background. I know I mentioned a little bit in the introduction, but what is Aduvo all about, and kind of what led you to founding that company?
Yeah, I think the 25 years that I ran Brickenden and then Hybrid Hero, it kind of taught me that I made all the mistakes that everyone makes when you're learning on your way and you're growing fast. And I kind of learned that it wasn't like bad ideas or a bad market that actually broke most businesses. It was getting the system, the structure, the people right. And as you grow, those kind of things don't keep pace with the growth. So the founder who got you to 10 million, it's exactly the bottleneck that's going to stop you getting to 50. Mm-hmm. And so you don't see it because you're too close to it. I sure as hell didn't see it, and I was often the blocker, that absolutely. So when I sort of found myself sitting down with people, I was having a coffee or a dinner party, sketching things on a napkin about how people could fix their businesses. It came to a point where I thought, well, when people were coming back to me saying that thing you said worked, and this happened, half a dozen times, and I thought, well, I can keep on just doing that informally, or I can build something real to actually help businesses in this space. And that's Aduvo. Mm-hmm. So, we come in, we sort of help out in the trenches, really helping people who are running their own businesses to get through to the next level and to get the outcome that they want, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm. Is there a moment, in your journey that was like, and it kind of, you said you've had a really extensive experience in businesses and leading them and growing them and whatnot. Was there a moment in those 25 plus years that you were like something that really, clicked for you? Like, yeah, this is something that I struggled with, or that maybe other people are dealing with, that kind of helped you get to where you are today?
There's a lot of those. I think that the toughest decision you have, I think, as you grow a business is, let's say you take an example of a corner store and you're trying to turn it into a Walmart, maybe just one Walmart store. The same person sits there in the corner store and they're operating the cash register, they're stocking the shelves, they're mopping the floors, they're providing security, locking up, all that sort of stuff. As you move to the next level of business, you need to have individual people. And that generalist is quite often the person who stops you from getting the next level. So I think that's probably the greatest lesson, how you can train someone to go from being a generalist to being a specialist. But also, sadly, it might be you need to let that person go and bring in 4 people or 10 people to do the different jobs. And that might be in your finance function, it might be in your sales function. But being able to make that decision to help yourself grow is really, really key and critical. And probably the toughest decision you've got, because it's real people, their lives, their mortgages, and you got to make those decisions.
Yeah, even if it's the business owner, him or herself, like getting out of their own way instead of trying to do everything for everybody.
Absolutely.
You focus, like I said in the intro, 10 million or 5 million to 50 million, size companies. You coined that 10 to 30 million, that stall zone.
Yeah.
What actually tell us a little bit more what that means?
Well, I think it's a really really good question. I think you can grow as an owner operator, and you can push and you can keep spinning the plates, but at some point you've got to step away from that, and you've got to look at it and say, well, I've got to let someone else handle some of these plates, and they're not going to handle as well as you do, and they're not going to care as much as you do, because to them as a job, and to you it's, you've put so much sweat and blood and tears into getting yourself to that point. So the reason we don't go below 5 is below that level you haven't really got to a stage where you're starting to build a structure. It's still really a one man running, or one woman running a show. But once you start to get up to 10, you've then got to kind of clear everything out. You've got to start, outsourcing various functions. You've got to start building proper systems, proper infrastructures, proper processes that then get you into that next phase of growth. And that next, that's the really critical thing. And probably at around 30, you can hopefully replace yourself in the day-to-day operations of running the business and bring in a CEO and those kind of things. So that's why those two levels are really, really key. The first one tends is critical, because getting above that hurdle, you've then got a proper system, a proper business that you're running. And then at 30, you can probably start to move to being on the board and starting to run it along those ways, those sort of lines.
Yeah. Do you have an example of a company you worked with that really went through that stall zone and maybe came out on the other end in a successful way?
Yeah, there was actually an Indian IT company, and they had, being an Indian, it's very prestigious to own a company that operates within Europe or within the US, and they'd sort of set that up, and they had a lot of owners who were not really doing the work. They owned the business, but they were sitting back. They were enjoying the prestige in their life in India of having this firm that had grown into that first phase, and so put together a plan for them, just 4 pages on just action points of what they needed to do. And the first thing they needed to do was to restructure the ownership and the management, because they'd been there for, I think, I'm going to say 7 years. It was around that amount of time where they hadn't really grown. And then for them to get to the next level, they had to completely restructure the management, move on. And they ended up going from around 8 owners down to 3, and buying out those other people, which then enabled them to go really to the next level. And they're getting close to the 30 now, when they're going to have to probably start thinking about what do they do next.
And is there a plan now that you're looking at being at 30 million? Yeah, are you growing, you acquiring, you selling? What does that conversation look like for you and your clients?
So for those guys, as they approach 30, they're starting to get into a different realm also with their clients, and they start to get into a different bucket. So they work with large corporates, large international telecommunication companies, and manufacturers. And so now they're getting into the next level of where they're going from being, I guess, a niche supplier into being a strategic supplier. And at that level, they now start to bang heads with the likes of Accenture, and they start to really struggle into that realm. And now they've got a whole bunch of other challenges, because the demands on them from the clients is going up as well. So they need people in who've done that. So I said they're a software sort of tech firm. They're going to need to bring in some talent from an IBM or someone like that, who can really help them with this next phase as the client demands increase.
What is something, you talk about, founder, that's solely relying on the founder and whatnot. As M&A advisors or corporate finance advisors, what are some subtle signs when you're talking with business owners that maybe are red flags of, hey, this owner dependency is a big thing. I don't know if they're ready to go to market, or it's going to decrease the value of their company, or what should, and then secondly, how do you have that conversation with the founder who's really, really, the business, getting that individual to understand that, and then take some action to reverse that, and maybe it is bringing in a team, and maybe allowing them to get out of the business a little bit more. And so what is kind of a 2-part question, but what is the advice? What are some subtle signs the advisor can look for, and how do you have that conversation with the business owner who this is their life, this is their reputation and their identity?
I think where I sit on that is that, having done it before, I think that gives me a little bit of it gives me a lot more gravitas with that owner, and being able to say, at some point you've got to let go of your ego. you being the central person that everything has to come back to. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to go anywhere from here. But the second part of that is if you can't get the founder to let go of the business in entirety, they're not going to grow as well. So and they're not going to get the freedom, and they're not going to get probably what they went into the business to do, which was, to build something and then to have a better quality of life. But if you're working 80 hours a week as a founder, because you've built this thing that's got enormous, it's, as a single owner, or maybe a number of owners, it's very, very hard. So I think getting out of your own way and letting go of that ego is really, really tough, particularly if you've defined your identity as it. I am founder of ABC Corp, and, that's been your life for 5, 10, 20 years. And now you're sort of saying, okay, I'm no longer the operator at this level, and I'm going to step back. It's being able to, I guess, position it that it is actually, it's a much better thing to be an owner and not an operator, and to be able to step out of that.
Mm-hmm. How do you talk to them? Because I would think maybe they feel like they might lose control by giving more autonomy to their leadership team.
Yeah.
What is your response when you get the sense that the business owner feels like, I'm not going to have the control that I once had?
That's, again, a really, really good question. I think that sort of comes back to what I was saying, I think, earlier, which is having the systems and the structure and the processes. If you have those and you manage the teams right, then you don't have that problem. If you don't put the structure in, and then you let someone take over a role, whatever that might be in your business, you've then lost control completely, and you're in a situation where very quickly things go wrong. Because you don't have that structure. Someone has to put that structure in for you to be able to step back.
Now, you have a lot of experience in the technology space, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. Is in that industry in particular, is owner dependency a bigger issue, a smaller issue, or is it kind of similar regardless of industry?
I think you have strong tech-led people who find it very, very difficult to let go of the code and to step away from that. I know someone who's CIO and CEO of his tech business, and he still wants to cut code. And so that's very, very hard to step back and say, you need to move up into a management layer. He's loved cutting code since he was 15, and he's now in his 50s. So that's a very difficult thing to do, and particularly if you want to scale, it's really, really hard if your founder won't let go of that.
So take that example. Take that as an example. What's a logical, practical first step that you would recommend someone like that to take to kind of start letting that, hey, you're working in the business, you're creating code, as opposed to now getting into a place where you're allowing your team to do it? Like, what's maybe a first practical step that person can take to kind of move that forward?
I think the first step is to probably set up an architectural committee or something like that, where what you do then is you get your juniors to come and present what they've done, and how they want to structure a particular technology solution. And you sit on that committee, and you then enable you to, I guess, help and train and encourage, rather than still being, hands on the keyboard. And I think, moving yourself that late, it still gives you some control over the structure. And then you obviously need to put in place procedures where people follow that architecture, but then able to manage it in that way still keeps you in charge of the solution, but it steps you away from being, cutting code all day long, which,
I would imagine to have a setup like that, not only are you, enabling others to do, maybe level up what they're doing, but it also keeps you in the know, because I would imagine when a founder, passes on responsibility, the unknown, might be a factor in that, that hesitation to transfer those duties.
Absolutely. And then, you generally have your reviews, and everything has to come back through that committee. So, you don't want to make it. The biggest challenge you have with putting together bureaucracy or structure like that is it not to be too onerous. You don't want to have it that you stall all the great startup, exciting, fast-moving things that you did that enabled you to get to where you are. But by the same token, you have to put enough structure in to keep control, or else you can't ever step back.
Now, kind of shifting gears a little bit here, when you're talking about selling a business and looking at their value and looking at, are they ready to sell or not ready to sell? You said, I think on the record, correct me if I'm wrong, revenue is vanity, structure is value. What can you elaborate on that? Can you elaborate on that, or what that philosophy means, and what's your thought process on that? Because when you think about a business, revenue is one of the key benchmarks, right? But you're kind of thinking more structure, and just can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So let's take an example. If the whole business is you, and let's just go at really small business, and it's all you doing it, and you're generating revenue off your time, off your expertise, the business has no value. You can't ever sell that business, again, because everything is dependent on you. So you put the structure in place, you put those procedures in place, you train people, you bring people up into roles, and then you let them create the revenue, and you create that structure. Then you're in a position to be able to step back. Then your business has value. Mm-hmm. If it's all on your shoulders, you cannot sell that business, because you're not there. There is no business.
This episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast is powered by Cornerstone International Alliance, where leading M&A firms come together. As part of this international network, you get access to global opportunities, over 200 M&A experts, enhanced collaboration and knowledge sharing, and some of the best M&A tools and resources available, all to help you take your firm to the next level. Ready to join this exclusive network? Visit cornerstoneia.com/new member today. So yeah, the revenue, solely being reliant on the business owner, as opposed to enabling your team to be able to. Now, are you talking specifically about just, the operations and doing the things, or are you talking about bringing in business more from a business development perspective? You're bringing in the leads, you're bringing in the main customers, like both play a role in that, I would imagine.
100%. And you're going to start bringing a sales team, and that's one of the hardest things ever, because they're talking to new clients. They may or may not work out. You've again got to have your KPIs. I always talk to guys in businesses that I run that says activity leads to opportunities leads to deals. Okay, so very, very simple. But what's your activity? What opportunities are we getting, and what deals are we doing? And then you have your standard metrics on what it is in your business that 15 conversations, you want to get one deal, or 2 conversations, or 200 conversations, depending on your particular business. But you got to have those metrics and bring those things through. And yeah, we as M&A advisors, we one of the biggest things we focus on is that owner dependency, and is there a strategy of, have you ever told a business owner to if you're just go for a month vacation, and or something like, do you have any strategies like that to where you typically would say, hey, business owner, do this, to just kind of gauge where you're at now with what your team can accomplish without you? Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Sometimes I've seen businesses where the owner thinks it's all dependent on him, and I say him because this was a him, but it could also be a her. But he went away, and actually the business flew. People felt that they had this guy sitting on top of them the whole time. He was out of the picture for a few weeks, and all of a sudden they're doing all these things and going, there's new initiatives. Yeah. So I think that sometimes is the case. Get the hell out of there so that someone else can step in. And if you've got the right people with the right skill set and the right mindset, they're gonna step up. When you're working with a founder who maybe doesn't have a team in place to step in for them, to help them, or do that exercise of leaving for a week or a month or whatever, what are you guys doing to advise them, and how are you helping them trying to find that team, that leadership team, that management team that can how do you help them create that team to be able to step in and then get up to speed and eventually get to the point where the business owner can step away for a little bit? Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to that question. One is, if it's an area you're not good at, then you don't enjoy, but generally, given that you're a founder and you've been successful, you're going to be good at the bits. So if it's something you don't enjoy, or part you don't, so let's say, for example, the finance is something you don't want. So that bringing in fractional CFOs are quite big these days. Bring someone in who can help you put that structure, get your cost structure right. Or you don't enjoy your marketing, so you want to go and get into your get someone in to do that. I would probably be looking at bringing in some external expertise before hiring, because one of the biggest challenges you have is you mightn't even know the skill set you need to hire to bring in. So I did some training for an accounting firm recently, and they didn't even know how to hire the right tech guys because they didn't know the skills they needed to hire to bring in to actually identify it. So I said, okay, well, why don't you get a firm in for a short-term engagement to get that all structured? Then you're going to understand what good looks like. And I think that's probably a good way to also de-risk the stepping back process.
Now, you worked with business owners who are looking to grow and then sell, but you're also working with businesses that are looking to grow and maybe the organic growth is taking too long. Maybe they want to grow through acquisition. What are your thoughts on that acquisition, to create value or maybe not creating value? Is that a good strategy in your mind?
I think there's a certain point you get to where organic growth becomes incredibly hard. I mean, it just becomes so difficult to be able to continue on your trajectory without acquiring. And so I think what you've got to do in that space is you've got to have a very clear, defined set of rules or guidelines of what you want to acquire. Because all of a sudden you can buy the wrong company and you've got to have what it's got to do, the value it's got to add, the market you want to attract. Do you want to expand in the same market? Do you want to be expanding in a different market? And then how do you bring that in and merge that into your organization? So I think the non-organic or the acquisition sort of side of things, it takes a lot of effort, and you really need, external firms probably to help you to identify, candidates, because good businesses aren't necessarily up for sale. You need someone out there, hitting the phones, calling these owners and trying to bring someone in that's going to meet your very, defined criteria. So we always used to have that it had to be positive to gross profit, and it had to be someone we could fit in within the culture. I guess they're the two big ones, because I remember identifying a perfect acquisition back when I was running Brickenden. They match in every way, but their culture was just so different to ours that we didn't go ahead with it. Everything else ticked, and we're just like, we cannot bring these in because it's just not going to work.
What about that particular instance the culture was off on? I mean, obviously you had a pretty strong sense of that to stop the deal because of it.
Yeah, we met some of the top 5 or 6 people, and a couple were going to go, but the other ones we couldn't line up with our management style and how they did things, where there was just a very big difference in sort of trust and how they were managing their teams. And we went through a big process because it was a very good deal, and we're just like, this is not going to work. It's just that they weren't going to align with, I guess, we're very big in putting structure in and then empowering our people, but they were much more sitting on their people, and therefore they also then weren't keen to step up at the other levels. So that whole trajectory coming through wasn't going to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Culture is a huge thing. And if you don't have trust your gut on, to a certain level, because if it doesn't feel good, it probably won't be a great fit, which is not always scientific,
Yep.
But if you have that,
it's the hardest thing to change. Yeah. The hardest thing to change. Yep.
Exactly. How are you working? So how are you and your team working with M&A advisors and your clients, and that with that, readiness to sell? Are they ready? Are they, and how are you typically working with clients who have maybe engaged with an or a corporate finance firm and just aren't ready, or is it the other way around?
I think a combination of both. We're really coming in to help the founders, and they might be CEO-led, they might be a CEO-led business, but generally a founder, how they can get to a point where they can get to the next level. So we're not trying to do the whole M&A play. We're trying to help, but we're basically there on the founders team to help go through that. Mm-hmm. Having been through a number of these, we want to partner with them and then help them get the outcome they want. And as you said, it might be to grow, but if they're wanting to exit, well, then what do you need to do? What are the things you need to set in place that are going to be attractive so that someone else will want to acquire you or merge with you and move forward from there?
Right. What's something that maybe you've seen from your side of the table on maybe something, sale maybe wasn't going well or didn't go well, or something that you thought like maybe this, if they had an M&A advisor, maybe if they had someone else who did this or that, like anything, you have an example of something that went wrong that our listeners can be like, hey, if I see that, like I know how to handle this situation, because we see that kind of often, or maybe I haven't seen that, but just identifying something that you've seen in your past that maybe could have been fixed, or in hindsight, it's always 2020.
I think the number one rule is if you're going to go through the M&A process and you're a founder operator, the cash you get on day one, that's the only real cash. I've seen two examples that spring to mind very recently where founders have done very well in their business. They've gone through the process and they never get the second payout. And so I think making sure that's well structured, because quite often the contracts are very carefully worded, that at some point, you're not going to get the payout. The one example I can give, the founder was going to get, good amount of money. I think it was 25 million up front. And then there was going to be a 3 to 4 year acquisition strategy at which he was supposed to exit with an extra 200. But it required him to be employed at that point. And in the contract, it said they could fire him at any time. So it got to, they're doing quite well. It got to about 2.5 years and they booted him out. So therefore, that whole 200 was not available to him. And I just don't think his lawyers went through the right process on that basis. That's not something that we were working on, but it's someone I know within my network. And, so he walked away with a good payout, but he didn't get the 200 he was expecting. He got 20 million at the front and he was, he's pretty devastated because it was his life's work to get to that point.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's where an M&A advisory firm, corporate finance firm comes into play. They've
absolutely
done that many, many times. They've negotiated those deals. And you go back to structure of the business being important. Well, structure of the deal is maybe more important than anything else, because cash at close, highest number possible is always a good thing. But if they're rolling some equity and they want to get a second bite at the apple, or there's an earn out where, kind of sounds like what that was, where they have to meet certain benchmarks to get paid over a period of time, to make sure that that's written in the contract in favor of your client, or, sets your client up for success and not failure. Like, kind of sounds like that example was.
Yeah, I just think he was a techie guy, and I just don't think he got it enough into the legals and probably wasn't well advised.
Well, that stems back to having a team around you, not only in your business, but in your exit process, because, someone like yourself, Chris, and your team have spent the time to help them increase value, get them to a position where they are ready to sell. Now, getting that team of yourself, your attorney, your accountant, maybe your wealth manager, the M&A advisor, all around the business owner, to insulate them from all the things that could go wrong, because it's a long process and there's a lot of things, lots of ups and downs, as a lot of things can happen, but insulating them, the business owner, with the team around them to cover all that for them. That's why we exist. And that's what, why we say, we're always worth the fees that we get for this, because a lot of times we're getting, more than the benchmark price, but we're also preventing things like, those things that'll pop up that a business owner who's going through this one time, most cases, the first time, they don't know what they don't know. And we're the experienced ones to kind of level the playing field with the buyer. So we can go to bat on their behalf to make sure that everything's going the way it should be, as best we can, right?
Absolutely.
Because we all serve a role, and, we're leaning on, and us as M&A advisors, we're leading the deal, but we're leaning on the M&A attorney, the client's accountant, to make sure that we have all the financials and make sure the number that they need for the sale is what they can to live their lifestyle after the business. Because last thing you want is a business owner to have to sell and not be able to live with, how they've lived. And now they got to make adjustments because the business wasn't worth what they needed it to be at the time of sale.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
What's one thing, that you would, to our, to an M&A advisor, to our audience, even the business owner, as what's maybe one or two takeaways from our conversation here today, Chris, that our audience can take away and be like, yeah, I got to remember those two things, because whenever it comes up in the transaction, I want to make sure that I'm aware of it, or I don't, go down that path. Or what are one of the top two things that you think our audience should know?
So I'll give you one thing from what we've spoken about, and one other piece of advice that I think is possibly the best advice I've ever had. So the first part is if you take yourself out of the business, if the business doesn't have any value, you don't have a business. Okay, so the sooner you can get yourself to a position where you're not the critical factor in each area of the business, the closer you are to being able to exit, but also to scale. So that's probably the first part. The second part is when you get to the point, and a lot of people have been amazing at their business, whatever their business might be, and they mightn't have had a lot of experience with lawyers, or they mightn't have had those sort of situations. Whenever you sit down in front with your lawyer and you're sitting down and you're looking at a document, always ask your lawyer this one question. This is what my lawyer of nearly 20 years in London. He's absolutely brilliant. He's Canadian and British, and he's phenomenal. And he says, always ask the question, what would you do if you're sitting on the other side of the contract, and how would you get through this to the other side's advantage? And that is the greatest piece of advice I've ever had. So whenever you sit down, whatever that contract might be, if I'm sitting on the other side of the table and I'm trying to pick this apart, what are the opportunities and where are they? And just change that perspective, and it really, really is critically important, particularly when you're doing this, which is probably going to be your listeners' biggest deal they're going to do in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Largest financial transaction of life in most cases, right? So yeah, it's always good to look at, the opposites, in an M&A process, the buyer's side. What are they trying to accomplish? Is there going to be synergies there, but also what are they trying to accomplish by doing it this way? Then you understand that. And then, yeah, I love that advice. That's a great way to look at it, but also to understand all perspectives, right?
Absolutely. But it will change your strategy. When someone's suing you or something like that, you say, well, what are their angles? Where are they coming from? If you run a business, unfortunately, you deal with lawyers all the time. And you all of a sudden find out what the angles people are playing at. But in a deal as big as what we're talking about here, for founders, it's really critical you do that as a step.
Yep, absolutely. Chris, thank you so much. This has been amazing. Appreciate you jumping on the show. Where can our listeners connect with you, find you, and the great work that you guys are doing?
Yeah, so its website is theaduvo, which is TheAduvo.com, and then /podcasts for we'll have a link into this session.
Okay, amazing. Again, Chris, thank you so much for joining the show today. That's all we have for this episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast. Make sure to like, share, and comment on this episode. Subscribe to wherever you find podcasts, and make sure you get notified when a brand new episode airs each week, every Thursday morning. And make sure to tune in every week for a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast to find out more great conversations like Chris and I had here today to help you level up your M&A practice. Until next time, everybody, take care. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast, and a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Cornerstone International Alliance. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to like, share, and comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next week with more insights, strategies, and real-life experiences to help you take your M&A game to the next level.